Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. I'm delighted today to be talking with Dr. Rick Hanson. If you were to go over to his website, rickhanson.net, you would find such a wealth of resources. And to listen to him in this interview, I just kept thinking, wow, he makes it so simple and it's so practical. And it's something that we can all really work with. And he has a depth that we don't find every day. So I hope you enjoy the interview. This is Lynn Fraser. I'm really happy to be here with Dr. Rick Hanson. It's our third time that we get to talk with each other and have an interview. And
Maybe we'll finally get it right.
Maybe we will. And then we could just post this forever and we don't have to talk again.
No, we're good.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we will do, though, is post your last interview so that people can get some of the brain science. But what I really wanted to do today is we are in such a different world. The last time we talked, we did that little bit on COVID, and it was pretty new. It was 3 or 4 months in. And so I wanted to kind of get a catch up on how you're seeing that and then go into some of the other work that you're doing. So do you want to just start there? What are you seeing and what are your thoughts on what's going on with that?
Well, if you're asking me, what am I seeing in kind of the culture, the zeitgeist in the Western world, especially in America, where I live, I would say that what I'm seeing is this really interesting combination in many people, and I can relate to some of this myself. This combination of a pent-up desires to engage life, to step out, to be done with a whole bunch of restrictions. That combined with this sense of disappointment or deflation, like the air being, popped out of the balloon about, hey, I thought we could be able to step into the new at this point. And for certainly a lot of people, restrictions are diminishing and, they're vaccinated. They might even have had their booster and they're feeling pretty good to go. And yet, the world still seems like a real mess. And it seems so difficult to get reasonable laws passed and steps taken. There's a tremendous amount of obstruction from one particular side that's anti-science and increasingly excited about authoritarianism. That's really weird. Meanwhile, the planet keeps getting hotter, and the factors that make the planet hotter that are creating a debt, a cost that will be landing on our children and our children's children irrevocably already, and it's just going to keep getting worse. That doesn't seem to be changing. So regardless of politics, a person can look at these facts and go, ugh. And, so I can feel that in people, that funny and interesting combination. That said, the truth is most people have enough food. Most people are living in relatively peaceful, not war-torn regions, whether it's in North America or around the world. And most of us and all of us have opportunities almost every minute of every day. If we're not demented or experiencing agonizing, overwhelming emotional or physical pain, we do have the possibility of practicing inside our own minds. Maybe our practice is to accept with self-compassion the pain and sorrow that is our burden right now. Maybe that's our practice, and that's a legitimate practice. Maybe it's to one day at a time maintain our sobriety, one breath at a time, one meal at a time, maintain our sobriety. That's enough. Whatever the practice is, though, we have that opportunity for practice. So I guess at the end of the day, a part of me is kind of traditional, I guess, in terms of self-reliance, a kind of old school view that, think about life 150 years ago. It was much harder then for most people. Think about life 20 years ago. Many positive developments were not really yet present, including medical advances. At the end of the day, however hard our life is, it's up to us to practice with it. No one can stop us from practicing in our own minds, and no one can do it for us. So we are responsible for our own practice. and we will deserve and earn the results of our practice. And I find that extraordinarily hopeful and liberating, even in its implications.
Hmm. So I have someone I'm in contact with that's being homeless, um, not able to find a home in Southern California where it's how big housing crisis, which is really true in a lot of different places too.
Yeah.
One of the things I really admire about her is her persistence.
Yeah.
She has very severe PTSD. She's got a
Mm,
lot of problems, and yet she really persists.
yeah.
So it's that grit that you talk about.
Yeah. And a tip of the hat to her. And yes, there are three areas where we can make things better: out in the world, in our physical bodies, and in our minds, what's in our heart.
Mhm.
And uh, any one of them is good, more of them the better. And sometimes one is full of opportunity. And so that's kind of where we go. Okay, let's see if we can get a stop sign put in place around our children's school. Yeah, we could help the kids and teachers work with their anxiety about being hit by a car, but
Right.
we could also put a stop sign there. Okay, good. Um, on the other hand, sometimes, like with your friend or this person the outer world is tough to change. It's
Mhm.
seriously messed up. It's horrible. Maybe in the outer world are structural factors of racism, sexism, other kinds of bias, poverty. And at that point, it's especially important to work with your own mind because that's what you have left, including, as you said, tapping into grit, persistence, and so forth. And as you
Mhm.
know, I'm extremely interested in how we build these inner strengths, the
Mhm.
actual process
Mhm.
of growing the good inside ourselves, hardwired into our own nervous system. But the point is that um, I think a lot of people don't practice. They don't.
Right.
And a lot of people don't practice because they don't know how to practice. But I think
Mhm.
even more people know how they could practice inside their own minds and they just don't. And
Why
that's a
is
great
that?
opportunity.
What's your sense of why people don't?
Well, first is it's puzzling, isn't it?
It is.
Because
Mhm.
if there's one place where you could take action, it's inside your mind. You don't need anyone's permission, and you have a lot of autonomy there. Yeah. Now I'm speaking of a normal range brain.
Mhm.
Yes, let's say if someone's really schizophrenic or experiencing a severe can't get out of bed episode of clinical depression, that's a certain thing, or the extraordinary compulsion.
Mhm.
But inside of that, now I'm talking about the 90%
Mhm.
roughly. Um, it's peculiar because for the 90%, they do have that freedom of action inside their minds, and they are the ones who will reap the immediate benefits of disengaging from a worrisome thought, moving their attention away from it, that form of practice, or surrounding it with spacious mindfulness, that form of practice, or bringing
Mhm.
compassion to themselves, or um, in ways that I talk about, gradually building up strengths inside that really do change you over time. They're the ones who really inherit the benefits of that. Isn't it strange? Isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, I think for some people, it's just almost like not a habit. And then but then the question becomes, well, why don't you take a little action in your mind to make it a habit of
Mhm.
practicing, not just being dead in the water or reaching for a bottle or the remote control in your television set. If you feel upset about something or you're bothered by something or grappling with something, why not work inside your mind, too? I don't know why people don't do it. It doesn't make sense to me, really. I think there can be certain factors that are internalized from society that breed a sense of inner helplessness and
Mhm.
defeat. I can get that. Or a sense of deep shame, which people often have issues with one kind of addiction or another, have been abused, mistreated, molested perhaps, and they're grappling with that sense of being bad deep down inside and therefore undeserving. to practice, to take initiative inside their own mind, to stand up against their inner oppressors, right?
Mhm.
And to grow the good and to turn to the good inside themselves. They don't feel they deserve it. Maybe those are reasons. I don't know. But I wonder, what
Complicated.
do you think, Lynn? You work with people a lot.
I do. Yeah. I think sometimes people don't think it's possible for them.
Hmm.
It's just like, well, yeah, that's okay for you, but not for me. Like, that's not possible for me. So sometimes I'll say, one of the things that's different for me is that I don't shame myself anymore.
Yeah,
Even if there's a behavior that I'm not 100% happy with, I don't go into shaming myself. I'm kind. I'm on my own side. I understand trauma.
yeah,
And so I just don't go there. And people are like, really? Like, how could that even be? That seems impossible. But so I think sometimes we can act as an inspiration for people.
right,
I'm just a normal person, just like everybody else. And I've done a lot of practice. It's like you have.
right. And I think the key point is about trying,
Hmm.
right? For a person to go from, 1 to 100 with regard to some development of not shaming themselves, that's a really big step. But you
Right.
got there through trying. You went from 0 to 1.
Yeah.
And then 1 to 2,
One,
me too,
two.
right?
Yeah.
And actually the step I'm focusing on here is 0 to 1. And it's
Right.
remarkable, isn't it, that even when people have tasted 0 to 1, so they
Hmm.
know it's possible to actually practice inside their own minds, at least
Hmm.
a little bit, and to then keep at it, but they won't do it. And that's a mystery to me.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so when we work with people, or if people are listening, it's really quite. I think it's very powerful to ask yourself, "Am I stuck on 0, or am I willing to take the step to 1?"
Hmm.
And if I'm stuck in 0, okay, that's where I'm starting.
Hmm.
What are the reasons for that? And then we're exploring the reasons. But the
Right.
point of that inquiry is to get from 0 to 1, to start taking any steps at all
Hmm.
inside your own mind, and
Hmm.
then building on those over time. Yeah.
Right. Hmm. So speaking of being stuck, a lot of people are stuck in anger right now. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to get into a little bit about relationships in a minute. But before we do that, and because it's so connected to relationships, what's your sense of what's going on there? Why are people so indignant and outraged, and even within families? And it's happening in part of my family too. There's polarization. There's disrespect. There's a connection, but there's also this real difficulty. How would you suggest that people could work with that?
Yeah. Well, in many families, there's, to name it, a political dimension to this.
Mm,
And so I'm naming the elephant right in the
mm,
room. And then that's really interesting. Uh, Whatever the source of anger, practicing with anger is a big deal. And while I'm a fairly calm and cheerful person, one of the one of the lessons for me over the last 10 years in my ripe old age is actually recognizing that I have a temper, and recognizing the harms that irritation, exasperation, feeling put upon, feeling aggrieved, having had it up to here, just even sitting in the background without it being, boiling over, has had a lot of impact in my life and in my relationships, and I'm still paying a price for, or trying to heal and repair. So, anger can have a lot of impact as an emotion in the four general so-called negative emotions: anger, sadness, fear, and shame, as a range of feelings, each one of them: anger, fear, sadness, and shame. Anger has the most impact on relationships. Usually it's the most consequential. And anger is tricky because it feels good in the moment. Unlike the other negative emotions, sadness, fear, and shame, there are there is activity of dopamine and norepinephrine when we're angry. Those are neurochemicals in your brain that are involved with experiences of reward. Anger's
Mm.
energizing. It's organizing. So there's a proverb that says, "Beware anger with its honeyed tip and poisoned barb." Feels so good, and yet it afflicts you and poisons you along the way. So I think recognizing the payoffs of anger is really helpful. There's something in our social nature as hunter-gatherers living in bands of 40 or 50 people that it's kind of gratifying to have contempt for others in a weird kind of way. It forms bonds of us who have contempt for them or who feel victimized or mistreated, aggrieved. We have grievances based on how they did us wrong. So these are very primal, addictive actually. We can get hooked on the dopamine rush and the other rewards that come from anger, and anger becomes an organizing principle and a way of life. So I think that's very helpful to be really honest with yourself, a fearless and searching inventory of the dirty little payoffs you get from your anger, including the avoidance of the vulnerability and that's involved in not speaking or acting from anger. There may be anger inside you. Anger is a normal feeling. And I think a lot of people shame themselves for their anger, particularly women who've been socialized to suppress anger and feel bad about anger, much like men tend to shame themselves for fear, even though, because dudes aren't supposed to be scared of anything, right? You know,
Yeah, that doesn't really happen.
the Fast and the Furious, that's us, episode 953, the sequel.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what to do about all that? And it can feel scary to speak from the heart, to acknowledge one's anger, but to not dump our anger on other people. And so we avoid that by, armoring up with our anger. So I think insight into all those things is really helpful. And then what to do about it, I think it's really great to be honest about the cost to you personally of your own anger. What's it do to you personally? Because when we feel angry, usually in the moment we feel righteous and justified. And they did me wrong. Bam. They deserve what's coming. And we don't realize in the moment, wow, this state of mind I'm in that feels so rewarding and righteous and deserved, entitled, is really bad for me. It's toxic. And when I came upon the phrase affliction or word affliction, it's kind of a fancy word. It's like an affliction, a disease or a burden. When I started to realize that my anger was an affliction upon me, however much that other person deserved it, let's say, it was an affliction upon me. And owning that and being honest about that was really helpful. Also, to realize that we can be discerning. We can see other people, including in family systems. We can see that Uncle Bob is a complex character. Uncle Bob is really nice to my kids. Uncle Bob is a cool guy to go fishing with and tell stories with, and he won't cheat at cards. And Uncle Bob just believes a lot of stuff that I know, plain as the nose on my face, are not true. I know they're not true. I know they're not true. I trust my knowing that they're not true. And so I can discern that about Bob, and I can kind of compartmentalize it. Bob, I'm just not going to go there. I'm not interested in that argument. Vote how you want to vote. Send money where you want to send it for your political candidates of your choice. Make your personal choices about whether to vaccinate yourself or whatnot about that. Do what you do, stay inside the lines. Don't throw any bricks through any windows or, do anything crazy. But otherwise, we just are going to disagree. And I don't have to be caught up in fighting you or persuading you. I see you clearly. And I also see clearly that you are bound and determined not to change. And in fact, you like this attitude and you like trolling. You like throwing these provocative bombshells right on the table in the family dinner. And you're not going to change. So I'm not going to struggle with you anymore. So to me, these are maybe something. I don't know. What do you do with
Mm-hmm.
your own anger or anger in family systems?
Well, pretty much I've always suppressed it because I'm a nice person.
Uh-huh.
So that's been my history. And then,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I look back over the last several months. I've been looking back over my activist years. I was very
Mm,
activist in the feminist movement, the lesbian movement,
mm,
anti-racism, all kinds of things in the 70s,
yeah.
80s, and around AIDS. And I was actually pretty angry. And so I kind of can't really sell myself that story anymore that I'm not angry.
Yeah.
And so I can really see how, that there's certainly a lot more calm and equanimity in my mind through meditation. Uh,
Mm,
and there's also some freeze probably.
mm,
But what's interesting to me is how we have this dance of protecting ourselves. And some people who have that anger, that joy and that pleasure that they get out of anger, they're not really safe to be around because they're going to hit us with some barbs. And so I guess what I've done is really given myself permission to not take on certain people, not to make it a rule that I always need to express something or, to just, like you said, Uncle Bob's not going to change. So I don't need to engage in trying to make that happen. But, that's a hard thing to do, isn't it? To not be attached to trying to make somebody different than they are.
right. And a part of this is, so what do we do when somebody else, and it's really tricky when it's in our family system, we can't
Yeah.
avoid them, or maybe and let's say there are ways that we care about them. We care about them. What do we do when this person is angry about a grievance? They have a grievance. They feel they were mistreated. They believe they are currently being mistreated by something really big and horrible.
Like COVID,
While, like
like
what?
the vaccinations and
Oh,
COVID.
like the 2020 election,
Oh, the 2020 election. Yeah. Hmm.
or the woke mob, or they believe that they were really mistreated by you because you did something. Bring it down out of politics. Bring it down to they think you really did something bad, and they're very caught up in that. Or maybe they're caught up in a third party. You're in a family system with them, and cousin Sue and Uncle Bob is really mad at cousin Sue because cousin Sue something that Bob took enormous offense at. And yet when we step back from it, whether it's vaccine mandates or elections or what happened to cousin Sue, we look at it and we go, and honestly, truly, in my discernment, either A, it never happened, or B, it's not bad like you think it is. Or C, it's a very small thing. It's not as big as you think it is. Or D, alongside the way that you think you're being mistreated by critical race theory or by affirmative action, or the fact that you have to be a little more careful in how you talk to women in the workplace than you used to be. Alongside that, discomfort or stress you're grappling with is a vast amount of mistreatment that you or people like you have been dishing out to these other people currently, if not for generations, you know,
Hmm.
right? You're accusing them of, let's say, election irregularities, when in fact it's your side that has been tilting the playing field in increasingly undemocratic ways for 30 or 40 years, all over the board, across the board. So it's totally out of proportion. Okay, right? Game
Hmm.
on. So that's where we start. That's a really interesting question, isn't it? When we're dealing with someone who feels, aggrieved, like at a force 4 hurricane, And we're looking at it, the basis for your grievance is like a tempest in a teapot, really. And let's suppose that it actually really is. How do we deal with that? That to me is really interesting. And one of the things I've really been reflecting on in our evolutionary neuropsychology as hunter-gatherers, 300,000 years as the species, a couple million years of tool-making hominids before that, is the impact of living in really small groups our whole life. Hunter-gatherer bands of 40 or 50 people our whole lives, basically, while, fearing often other bands and competing with them for scarce resources in a raw survival kind of world. And one of the things that I've really come to appreciate, which has been deeply puzzling to me, is why in the world would people want to feel aggrieved? Why would they want to feel mistreated when they're not? When there really isn't a basis for the grievance. Why? And I think it's helpful to have insight into, what is making other people, if in your judgment, you have to slow down and make sure you're not missing the picture. You have to work it through. But when you step back, you ask yourself, you're in situations where you're with someone and you think to yourself, their complaint about you is either groundless or is way out of proportion to what really happened. It's like a workplace setting or something like that. What do you do about that? And one of the things that has helped me about that has been to realize the ways in which it's weirdly gratifying to feel aggrieved. It's weirdly gratifying. People like it. Again, it becomes a state of mind that they get addicted to, they get hooked on. And also, feeling mistreated, believing that you're really mistreated by some other person or group is a fantastic way as to preemptively neutralize their complaints about you.
True.
Right? You accuse, basically, if you accuse them of doing to you what actually you've been doing to them all these years, it's extremely powerful technique because it blows their mind. They can't believe you're saying that. They don't know what to say. It's a very effective way to just neutralize their complaints about you by puffing up huge complaints about them. So whatever it might be, I'll finish just by saying that it's really served me to step back and have more understanding as to how gratifying grievances are and how much people use them to neutralize and not have to deal with the legitimate complaints of others, and to also form group identity. The aggrieved team. We are so mad about you all mistreating us in these ways that are utterly groundless. Actually, they're not happening. Yeah.
Right. No. So if we go, if we go onto your website, which is incredible, the amount of resources that you have on there.
Oh, good. Thank you.
It's just, there's so much richness. And I really encourage everybody to go and have a look. And you have free meditations on Wednesday.
Tons free. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have all these resources that are free and some that aren't free, but that are really worth getting.
Yeah.
And also the Being Well podcast.
Oh.
And so are you enjoying being able to interview people? It seems like you're really having fun doing that, you and Forrest.
Oh, I just think I have one of the great jobs or gigs, right? I think to myself, I get to do 90% of what's cool about being a college professor, and I get to avoid 100% of what's a drag about it, one way of putting it. And it's also just sort of my nature. I really respect people who do scientific papers, but on the other hand, having done a dissertation and also recently published a paper, where it's about to be published in the Journal of Positive Psychology about learning to learn from positive experiences. My material on taking in the good, positive neuroplasticity, and so forth. To do a research paper is an incredible amount of minutia, tiny, tiny detail. And, unless you're extremely lucky, your paper at most will be read by 300 people. Period, over the course of its entire life. So I really enjoy the fact that I'm someone who uses science and uses research, but like you, really, really applies it. And I get to meet wonderful people and to do what I can in the world. Yeah, I think
Mhm.
one of the great joys is to feel that we can contribute in a way that is suited to our nature. And I think there are many people whose channels of contribution are are blocked up or dried up. And as I think out loud, and I think for many, many people who are, let's say, sober after a number of years of not being, sometimes one of their regrets is all the wasted opportunities of those
Mhm.
years and the ways in which their contribution didn't really flow out into their family or into their work or into their world for different reasons. And I think for people of any age, um, you know, old fogies like me or
And me.
however, whatever age you are,
Yeah.
to really ask yourself in your heart of hearts, is there something in your innermost being that you'd like to give more of? And it could be as simple as giving a smile or a blessing to people you pass on the street. Internal blessing, don't freak them out. Maybe is what you
Bless
say.
you.
Yeah. Unless you really want to go there, but okay. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
just what do you want to give? I think, ungiving, undergiving is kind of, it's
It's
a
a lot.
toxin to the soul.
Mm. One thing that I encourage people to do is to volunteer.
Hmm.
And I've had such rich experiences volunteering throughout my whole life
Yeah.
and have met people that I would never have met and have had opportunities to give. And it's such an amazing thing to do.
Hmm.
And yet, as you're talking about people who are not sober now and what they're seeing is I couldn't really manifest my gifts in the world because I was tied up in my addiction. I hear this from a lot of people and I see it for myself too. I was in freeze. I was in trauma. I had so much unhealed trauma. I
Yeah.
just couldn't do it. And there's such a regret of all of that time. And sometimes when it comes up in my own mind, it's like, you stayed in that relationship way too long. You wasted time. It's like I wasn't wasting time. I just couldn't move forward in the way that I'm moving forward now.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
such a loss, though, isn't it? Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And it can be redeemed in part by one
Hmm.
day at a time, what we do now forward.
Hmm. Yes, it's certainly not too late. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are you working on now? What's your upcoming book or project, or what are you
Hmm.
doing now?
I'm writing a book about relationships that's due in March of 2022. It'll probably come out early in 23.
Mhm.
And it's basically about how do we make great relationships with our thoughts and our words. What do
Mhm.
we do with our mind and our mouth, essentially, to actually make really good relationships of all kinds with people at work, with neighbors, with people we want to distance from. One way to make it a better relationship sometimes is to step back from Uncle Bob.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and for example, so that's what I'm working on now. And it's based on the fact that I know a lot of people who'd like to have better relationships, including close relationships, but they don't know how
Mhm.
or they don't know what to do after they do the first thing. So they know how to say something, but when that other person responds, they don't know what to say then. So that's what that book's about. It's super practical, super direct, and making great relationships is its working title. So that's pretty neat. I'm
Mm.
pretty embedded in that. More broadly, I'm interested in the upper reaches of human potential. I've spent a lot of time as a therapist with people who are grappling with, a lot of suffering and difficulty. If you imagine a range of human experience from -10 to +10, certainly helping people in the minus territory, underwater, at least come up for air and gradually, be able to minimally tread water. But then increasingly, especially in the last couple years, I've with my book, Neurodharma, that was my previous book, Neurodharma, 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness. I've gotten more and more interested in what's going on in people. I'm making this gesture of a mountain rising as people walking different routes up the mountain, whether it's a religious path or a secular one, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or shamanic mysticism, whatever it might be. People who move higher and higher up the heights converge in their qualities. They become more and more like each other. This profound inner peace, an unshakable joy, a lovingness, no matter what, these qualities. And how do we actually develop those qualities in us? Sense of oneness with everything more and more. So that's definitely been an interest for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's doable. It's doable.
Mm-hmm. And your course on Neurodharma was also very good because it really broke it down. There's a lot of guided practices.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your course.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's kind of wild to. There's this wonderful metaphor. I hope people will relate to it. It comes from 2,000 years ago, roughly, in early Buddhism. It's this metaphor that practice, the process of healing, growing, and awakening. Mm-hmm. Think of that. Healing, growing, awakening is like a cart with 2 wheels following 2 tracks. And one wheel and track is the process of development of lasting change. You are changing yourself. So you are releasing old trauma, you are letting go, you are abandoning addictive desires, you are adding new outlooks, new perspectives, a new sense of your worth, a feeling of new skills, dealing with your partner. You're changing for the better. Okay? And I have definitely been working that wheel since, pretty much about age 15, mm-hmm. when I kind of hit my bottom of how miserable I was. Then there's this other wheel, though, this other track, which is innate goodness, beauty, love, awareness, wisdom. That's always already the case. Actually, already the case. The underlying ground of being that is beautiful and already perfected. It cannot be improved upon. And you could just see that some people like me kind of ignored that second wheel for a while. And now my practice very much is about returning to that second track, that second wheel, and really including it in my efforts. On the other hand, I've known some people who are, their attitude is something, they're so caught up in that second wheel of their true nature already, or the underlying divine nature of reality, that they don't do any kind of inner work. They don't practice. They don't learn. They don't grow. They don't change. And when they're tapped into the ultimate, while they're in prayer or while they're on psychedelics or while they're having some kind of experience, they're okay. They're good to go. But you get them out of that in their job or relationship or raising a family or dealing with their, irritating teenager, they're in trouble. So anyway, both wheels, both tracks, and they work together. And a person might ask themselves which one of these might be really wise to surface more of in their life these days.
Right. And there's a lot of ways to do that and a lot of support now. So if you're talking about accessing your own basic goodness, someone might go, well, how do I do that? But there's a lot of guidance on that now.
Yeah, there really is. Non-dual approaches. Tara Brach has a beautiful book called Trusting the Gold, really about that.
She does beautiful work.
Yeah. And even kind of simply, a person could ask themselves, okay, try to help yourself just sit quietly for a few minutes and just sit. So you're not doing anything. You're not trying to gain anything. So you're watching that attitude of mind to try to get somewhere or get something. And just for this time, run an experiment. See what it's like to disengage from that self-improvement project. And also no planning, disengage from planning, disengage from worrying, disengage from ruminating. You're not trying to clear anything out. You're just sitting. This is basically one key Zen practice, shikantaza, just sitting. Only and exactly sit. So there you are. And if you can do that, you'll start to notice all the busyness, but you'll also start to notice what's under the busyness. And for many people, what you notice that's under the business is an underlying feeling of discontent and melancholy, fear, anger. It's there, unprocessed negative emotion that's underneath it all. Or just feeling so tired, so let down, so bereft, right? Okay, got it. All right, hang in there. And what's under that? What's under that? Well, what's under that is the awareness of that pain. And awareness itself is pure. Awareness itself is not pain. Awareness is just awareness. And so that's under the pain. And also, is there a part of you or a mysterious quality that's present there of a kind of peaceful witnessing of it all, with some warmth in the witnessing? There's like a tenderness, a caring in the witnessing, compassion in the witnessing. Can you be aware of that? And maybe even, and in the underneath layer, a sense of what kind of widens out, what opens out into everything. Most people can do those 3 steps that I'm naming there. They can access that. They can just sit. They can feel, stuff underneath that busy layer that is unpleasant. And then third, underneath even that, they can tap into their true nature already, which may extend ultimately into something divine. And so that's available to people. I wanted just to name that with your indulgence right here and now, because that's accessible to people.
It is. And the thing about tapping into that pool of unprocessed fear and pain is that we need to be steady here in the present moment. Yeah. Otherwise, we're going to get dragged back.
Yeah.
And that's not good. So to do it as a practice, a just sitting practice, and to just keep, like you said, just kind of let go of the worry, keep coming back. We're doing a practice of just sitting. That's such a powerful thing. And you're right, people can do that.
Yeah.
We don't have to find or build true nature or basic goodness. It's already there.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We uncover it, we get in touch with it, we develop confidence in it.
Yeah.
But it itself is not something that can be made.
Right. Or lacking of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So let's take that into relationships. I want to just kind of circle back to relationships a little bit before we finish. So right now, COVID is changing our lives in terms of, like you said, more people are vaccinated, maybe more family visits are happening. I know a lot of people are feeling pressure around this Thanksgiving, Christmas. And also there's just a lot of people who are really lonely and isolated and who have been really suffering during this time. So how like just kind of based on your book maybe, or what you might say, how are people going to move back into relationship in a way that's healthy and connecting? What would you have for people?
I think there are different things that come to me and that are very practical and in the trenches. They're probably things you've thought of yourself, of course. One is to just take into account that other people have had a hard year too. Uncle Bob, I think he's a great guy who's gone way off the deep end, and he's had a hard year too, let's say. Cousin Sue, she's definitely had a hard year. They've had a hard year too. They're rattled, they're freaked. Maybe they're clinging to certain beliefs or positions because that makes them feel more secure in the raging sea of information out there and all the things that have happened. They've had a hard year too. I think that's helpful. Another thing I think is to just be clear for yourself that it's not your job to fix them. They are what they are. You're going to have a fairly limited time. It's really not your job to fix them. You sure have benevolence. If there's something you think is useful to say, and then back out after you say it, just put it on the table. If they want to pick it up, fine. If not, okay. But on the whole, you're not burdened by that. I think a lot of us, it's easy to drop into the sense we have to have an agenda when we meet people, and to realize, well, maybe there's an item or two. I just got to talk about the mineral rights, or I got to talk about what are we going to do with grandma's ashes. We got to do something with them. But on the whole, maybe we could walk in with no agenda. And it's actually really remarkable to be in the presence of someone who, when you're talking with them, you feel like they don't have an agenda. They're not going to let you mistreat them. They're not a chump, but basically they don't have an agenda. They're just right there. They're open to whatever is happening. And we can give others that gift by not having an agenda ourselves. Another, I think, is to be very clear about, I think, these three things that often get shamed or punished or suppressed in people, typically, again, women, to claim the right to see what you see, value what you value, and plan what you plan inside the sacred temple of your own innermost being. It may be unsafe to reveal to others that you really have recognized Uncle Bob's alcoholism or latent fascism. And serious racism. It's just not appropriate for them to watch your face twitch. So you don't let your face twitch, and you sure don't say anything. But inside your mind, you're real clear. Oh, okay, I see what I see. I see what I see. And if you think about sick families, and a lot of research on addiction and family dynamics and family shame, going back to genius stuff, John Bradshaw, fantastic stuff in the 80s, The Shame That Binds Us. You're familiar with that stuff, I'm sure. Great stuff. Family Secrets, or the denial of gaslighting, the use of gaslighting with people to make them think that they can't trust their own senses. So the capacity to see what we see, to know what we know, is really attacked in sick systems. And so it's very important to reclaim that power for yourself, that you have the right to recognize what you see. And so when people are coming back into family systems, to really sit in the truth of it and to trust what you see. Double check it, especially your own biases. But if you see it, you see it. And then value what you value. You have the right to care about what you care about. Maybe for you, you care a lot about avoiding any risk of breakthrough cases that will lead to long COVID for you. And for you, the odds of that, you recognize that statistically the odds of that in that kind of setting are maybe 1 in 500. But for you, you value that 1 in 500 risk, and you don't want to have it. You don't want to have it. And that's your value system. Maybe other people, they'll tease you. They'll say, how come you're still wearing a mask? The windows are open. But for you, hey, that's what I value. That's what I care about. Know what you care about. Know what your values are. For a lot of people, they don't have a clarity about what their priorities are, what their values are, and they don't have a sense that they're entitled to them. And then last, when you're going home for the holidays, what's your plan? Have a plan. Do you have your own transportation? I mean, my life got a lot better when I started realizing I was going to have my own transportation at family gatherings, and I was going to have even reasons to legitimately step outside or take a little break or go help my son with his homework. He really didn't need any help, but I was going to go help him with his homework just to kind of get out of the room for a little while to find my footing again. So what's your plan? Know what your plan is, kind of think through what you'll do what are certain contingencies. What's your plan for sticking up for your partner? If you're visiting your family, what's your plan for disengaging your kid from some of the cousins who are just kind of jerks, let's say? I mean, or whatever it might be. What's your plan when they start pushing a glass of wine on you and you don't really want to drink? Or they kind of tease you about being a vegetarian. Come on, have some turkeys. The bird's dead. Why not eat it? Well, I don't want to. Okay, I'll stop there. Yeah.
A plan is such a underrated or something we don't tend to think about. But
Yeah.
to really think through what's going to trigger me in that situation,
Yeah.
what's going to bother me, what am I not going to be comfortable with, and then to have a plan for, I'm just going to say this, or I'm going to get up and say I need a drink of water, or I need to help my kid with homework or whatever.
Yeah.
That's such a good idea because then we don't feel so frozen either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I was a wayward Boy Scout. Right? My troop, a bunch of juvenile delinquents. So we had a lot of fun. We weren't too horrible, but I didn't go all the way. But in any case, Boy Scout motto, maybe Girl Scouts too: be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that you're prepared as best you can be is so calming.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and I just think a lot of people. I've talked with a lot of people who are anxious about this or that. And I get it. Yeah, it is challenging. It is threatening. What's your plan? Well, you know, a bad plan is better than no plan because at least if you have a bad plan, you'll start getting feedback that your plan needs to get improved, right? And that's a real opportunity for people. Make a plan. Yeah.
So, one of the things that happens when we're making a plan, though, is we're thinking about all the things that could go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
How do you stop from going into catastrophic thinking?
Oh. Well, I think part of the plan is to recognize that there are only so many things you can control. And I could drop a little Zen wisdom on you here that's really dropped on my head about a year ago. And I've just been reflecting on this teaching almost daily ever since. So basically, this true story Zen master called Unman was asked, what is it that leaves fall and trees wither? Trees wither, leaves fall. What is it? And he said, body exposed in the golden wind. Now there's poetry in that. You can just feel it. Body exposed in the golden wind. And the golden, so autumnal, autumn, leaves falling, but more generally, beautiful wind, but it's also a wind, and we're exposed. To live is to be exposed in the golden wind. And sometimes those winds are cold and even horrible. We must live exposed. We're inherently exposed, and there's a limit to our protection. How many umbrellas can we bring? How many raincoats can we wear? Ultimately, we're all exposed to, if we're lucky, to aging with its illness and then inevitable death, and exposed along the way to the loss of, if you love, you're exposed to the losses of those you love. Pets, family members, parents, older people, sometimes young people. So there's no way around it. And I think finding a way to just sort of to be increasingly at peace with these facts. The Serenity Prayer, give it up to God, if that's meaningful for people, or just simply a general sense that we do what we can. We tend to the causes as best we can, the factors as best we can inside ourselves and in our conduct, and practical plans to gather allies for the uncomfortable holiday meal, and line some things up in advance. We do that, but at the end of the day, there's a limit to those preparations. Inevitably, we live exposed in the golden wind. If you want to live, you must be exposed in the golden wind. That's a deep teaching. Puts it in perspective. So yeah, if a person's mind tends to go to catastrophizing this or that, there's a ton of research on dealing with anxiety that says, I got it, slow it down, break it down into small parts. What will you do with each one of those parts? What can you do? Recognize when you've come to the limit of what you can do and see if you can move to a kind of acceptance and disengage from the habit of self-doubt and rumination. Now, that's easier said than done, but that's where 0 to 1 is. Are you helpless in the face of the habit of rumination, or do you disengage from it right now? Do you make yourself think about something else? Do you turn on the television? Do you wash your hands? Do you do something different? That now you've gone from 0 to 1. That's great. And then a minute or 10 minutes later, you're back to ruminating right there. Do you break the circuit again and again and again? That's on you to do. And often I find that people, they lack the motivation to go from 0 to 1 for various reasons. Sometimes because they're afraid that if they stop being, they're anxious about not being anxious. They're afraid that if they will feel confident and prepared, that's when they'll forget to tie that one last loose thread. And then as a result, they're going to be punished badly like they were when they were a kid, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then you can really help yourself realize, no, I can be strong. I can be real clear. Like I think of you, Lynn. I mean, you seem like a pretty chill person, and I would not want to mess with you. You just have this kind of quality. Like you're benevolent, you're kind, but don't mess. Don't mess with Yoda. You know what I mean? Right?
You. That's a compliment.
It is a compliment. So, to realize, hey, we can be Yoda, we can be kind of calm, we can be clear, we can be strong, and we can track threats. We can have our eyes wide open. We can have our ears wide open. And we can recognize the nature of Uncle Bob, let's say, or whoever else it might be, or someone who's all smiley and friendly, but is really, really not on our side. We can recognize these things without being poisoned by hostility or fear or freezing panic.
Right.
That's a real breakthrough for many people, to realize that they can step out of old ways of anger and fear and addiction for managing their issues, and they can step into a new way that's grounded in compassion, love, self-respect, courage, and a peaceful heart while dealing with the same challenges.
I love what just to circle back to what you said about just let yourself know what you know and honor what you value. It's okay to be different from other people.
Yeah.
We really need to have that integrity within ourselves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, it's
It's
sweet.
such
Maybe
a
as we
delight to
end,
talk with you.
yeah, same here, Lynn. We're good. Me just thinking about this. I'll finish if I could on a good translation of the Buddha's last words. And I'm
Mhm.
not pitching Buddhism here, which we could really understand as a psychology, as a very deep,
Mhm.
way of looking at reality and life and ourselves, and with a lot of very practical inputs. And so, as best we know, as he was dying after 40 years of teaching, the Buddha basically said, things fall apart, tread your path with care.
Mm.
And like a lot of deep statements, you slow it down and look at those words. Things do fall apart. Inevitably, this particular life that's been bound together will disperse. Things do fall apart. Relationships fall apart. Countries fall apart. Bodies fall apart. This life is not permanent. Tread your path with care. With care, in two meanings, which relates to what we're just talking about. With care, in conscientiousness. Do your work. Pull your weight. Hold up your side of the log. Be careful, right? Make sure your seatbelt's on. Protect your kids. Conscientiousness. And then there's the second meaning of care, which is what you care about, your values, right? Tread your path with clarity about your own values, what's meaningful to you, what your own priorities are, and honor what you care about. The higher happiness compared to the lesser happiness of a quick fix or a quick high. Um, Lasting um, peacefulness and harmony in your relationships rather than the quick burst of anger or attack based on your own exaggerated sense of grievance, let's say. What do you care about? Can you honor that? What do you want to contribute to that theme? What do you
Mm-hmm.
want to give? What do you care about that's within you, a value that you'd love to have flow out more into your relationships and into your life and into your world? So tread your path with care.
Mm, that's beautiful. So, how do you suggest people get into your work? Do you want to just name your website? And you have some highlights that are like, there's so much richness there. And so I'll put that link too so people can go there directly. But how would you suggest for someone just to kind of enter your work? What are some ways
Oh,
that you?
thank you. My website's straightforward. It's my name, Rick Hanson, SON, .net. So that's straightforward. And we basically have very well organized material. Maybe there's a pain point like anxiety or trauma, loss. Maybe that's a way in. So right on the home page, right? Like 3 steps down. It's like, what are you interested in? We have meditations for different things, for for happiness, for love, for wisdom, for gratitude, for calm. We have particular topics like stress or making a family or improving relationships. It's all right there. So I would just say that. And I would say in particular, if people are interested, check out my free weekly newsletter, Just One Thing. That's what it's about. Just one thing, one little thing you can practice with these days, like be a good neighbor. I think that's my current one. What I actually mean by that, or love your neighbor. I think I
Mhm.
actually even went more radically than that. What's that actually mean? That's a little practice. Or, find joy, or admit fault and move on, or get on your own side, things like that. So the free weekly newsletter covers each one of those practices. It takes about 2 minutes to read. It's really short and
Mhm.
sweet. About 200,000 people get it regularly, so it's definitely pretty popular. And you can unsubscribe at any time, and we'll never sell or share your email address with anybody. So I would say that check out my website, and if you like, subscribe to the newsletter.
That's excellent. Well,
Thank you.
thank you. It's lovely to see you
Yeah.
again. This is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. We have an exciting lineup for our 5th annual, including Dr. Gabor Mate as our keynote speaker. Head on over to radicalrecoverysummit.com to learn more and watch the interviews.